Hi and welcome back. This morning I was out in my little yard sketching some ivy, and I thought it might be a good idea to come back into the studio and do this little sort of ink and watercolour painting based on that. It's another really quick and really easy ink sketch. You can be as loose as you like. It's a very forgiving technique. So let's get started. So I've got my ivy here for inspiration, and I'm going to be using a glass pen. It's a dip pen that you dip into ink, and so I'm going to dip it into my Vandyke brown Dr. PH Martin's ink. You can use any ink for this though, and I'm going to start just roughly drawing in the curving shapes of my ivy stem. Now I'm not drawing it exactly. I don't think this exercise should be about that. It should be about trying to capture something of the essence of the way the ivy grows and curls without getting too bogged down or worried or pressured about trying to get it right. I'm just trying to sort of get some of these interweaving shapes of these darker stems, and then I'm going to be using ink and paint and a water spray to sort of add a bit of life and impact to this sketch. I'm using the back of an old painting for this experiment. You could do this in a sketchbook. It's a good idea to use watercolour paper for this because we'll be using a fair bit of water in a moment. And also the watercolour paints I'm going to be using, which are on the palette next to me. And I'm going to be using a bit of the sap green, perylene green and the aureolin yellow across the top. So I've nearly got enough ink on the page. I'm just going to try and thicken it up a little bit. Because this pen is made of twisted glass, it holds quite a lot of ink and it can get quite blobby sometimes, but I don't mind that. It's all going to help with this loose and lovely texture, and I can get some really thick marks, and I don't mind if it runs or spots or anything like that. As I say, I'm just having fun with this, experimenting, the pressure's off, and let's see what happens when I get a water spray and mist it. And straight away, I hope you can see that the ink bursts out from where I've drawn it in and really gives me these such pretty effects. It's almost like the little rootlets that come off the stems of ivy, and it just adds so much to my painting. Without me having to really do anything apart from put in the initial sketch. Obviously your ink has to still be wet for this to work. So I'm sort of adding more lines, and I'll spray again and see what happens. But I'm really enjoying the way that the ink and the water interact here on the page. And I'm going to start putting in some paint now. So I'm using a small synthetic round brush. It's a Polina Bright, but you can use any small round with a good point, or a small mop brush. I'm just going to really roughly introduce some greens and yellows where my ivy leaves have been drawn, and in a few additional places here and there, keeping it really loose and experimental, and just trying to sort of add touches of colour here and there to just enhance the sketch and to work around what the water is actually giving me. And where I paint into the wet paper, then the paint will run as my board's at 45 degrees. And I'm starting to really enjoy the way this sketch is looking. So I can then spatter paint or ink onto the page, and where it hits dry paper I'll get a little spot. Where it hits the wet paper, then it will spread out and diffuse, and again it's all adding to give me these really beautiful painterly marks. And I really think this technique is very, very interesting, and also, as I say, it takes the pressure off because it's quite unpredictable to a certain extent. But if you're careful to make sure that you get a sort of a fairly realistic looking ivy leaf to start with, but without getting too bogged down with the detail. Once you spray, if you don't overdo the spraying, then your sketch mostly stays in place and the ink just bursts out in a few places, adding to the effect. And then you can continue building up, adding more paint, more spatter, drawing in with more ink into the wet paper and the dry paper until you've got enough leaves and you like the look of your sketch. And I think I've nearly got there. You can of course add more water spray if you want. The misting spray that I've got sends out a really fine mist. You don't really want a spritzer for this. This is the sort of misting spray that you can buy very cheaply that hairdressers use, and you can find them online for sort of a few pounds, but they work really, really well to send out this very fine mist which gives us these gorgeous effects. Dabbing back with a tissue can also add different effects. The ink, of course, when it dries, it's completely water resistant and it dries quicker than watercolour, so you'll never be able to dab it right off, but you can sort of take it back a little bit while it's still wet and then work into it a little bit more. Just bringing out a tiny bit more detail, maybe a few little extra tendrils of ivy, twisting and turning, and I think we're just about there. So let's have a closer look, and here it is. I'm really pleased with the effects. I love the way that I've managed to sort of capture the essence and the spirit of the ivy in a very fresh way, quite an illustrative way. So I hope you'll try something like this. It's really quick, it's really easy. It can be a bit messy, so make sure you put plenty of paper down or work in an area where that doesn't matter. And of course, as it only takes about 5 minutes to create something like this, you can fit it in at any point during the day. I'd love to hear what you think of this sort of technique in the comments below and how you get on if you try something similar. And I'll be doing more of these quick, easy and experimental ink sketches over the coming weeks. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon, and happy painting. Bye.